Let's call this meeting, budget meeting of the Waunakee School District to order at 7:30. Board members are present. Approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
It's passed. Public comments? Did we receive any public comments? Not that I've seen. Okay, budget update. Steve.
So thank you, Jack. So the first agenda item that we're going to talk about is the district's branding expenses. As this committee recalls, you did authorize expenditures up to $25,000. If you remember a couple of months ago, we shared a document that had broken down some potential expenditures into some priorities. We had a couple of different tiers identified on what we wanted to tackle first and then what would be next. The committee did ask for us to keep you informed of where we're at with this. So we did attach a couple of things just to share with you. The first one was, Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind grabbing the first PDF there. What we have here on the first one is that spreadsheet that you had seen before. And we are using color coding to kind of track as we're going. Annie's the person who was helping keep this organized and track all of this. So I don't know if Annie, if you wanted just at a high level to talk about, what you've tackled so far and anything that you would want to share.
Yes, I think, we started with we tried to kind of focus in Randy, Steve, kind of maintenance, high school, talked about high visibility areas to kind of start with our first $25,000. So that included, we're working right now in progress, all of the district vehicles. So we're working with Helen Brand glass for that. And so that is in progress. There's a couple of vehicles that are completed. The second is the side wall padding in the old gym at the high school. So a special thank you to maintenance. They've really helped with a lot of these projects and, keeping this going. The pads are removed in the old gym and we're just awaiting installation of the new pads in the old gym. Door wraps was another at the high school, the entrance to the field house and the old gym. So those look really nice.
Those were beautiful.
Yeah, those turn out really, really nice. I think 2 signs kind of complete that package. The sign right out here in front of our district office. And then there's a Welcome to Warrior Stadium sign that faces Q, kind of on the end of Warrior Stadium there. So we are working, those designs are completed and that's in progress as well. So there's a lot of additional items that don't necessarily cost any money, like we're replacing envelopes and letterhead and, social media, graphics. So lots of, items that don't cost any money. So you'll see that. So that's kind of part of that $25,000 as well. We did create a folder that had some pictures of some different items that we're hoping to do, or, that were part of that 25,000, either in progress or completed too. So is that linked there?
Yeah, we did
Rebecca?
put a couple of the pictures in there just to get a sense of kind of some of the work that's been going on. So if you want to just pull up a couple of those, we just wanted you to get a flavor for what Annie's been working on, so you could kind of see what it's looking like. There are a few others that we threw in there too.
When do you expect to have him eat this first 25,000? School, start of school?
Yes.
And are we on track to do that?
Yes.
Okay.
So at some point, we do want to come back and talk about when we want to take the next steps. So that's something just to keep in mind. The list from Annie had priority areas, and we've tackled the first area. One of the things that you could do is wait until we complete the audit process for 21-22 and see where we're at. Another thing you could do if you like the way this is going and want it to keep going, you could recommend an additional level of expenditures, whatever you're comfortable with. We just wanted to share with you where we're at, what we've accomplished so far, what Annie's working on. And we certainly are open to your thoughts on where you would like to see this go.
Something else.
So-
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, Annie and I also met with Waunakee Area Education Foundation yesterday. One of the things we'd like to do is have a launch of this with staff. One way we can get the brand out there is having staff be part of it, having something that they can tangibly take with them on the first day of school. So WAIF is working with us on that, and it's going to have some proposals to them so that we can hopefully move that forward, so that first day back with all staff, that there's something that is tangible that represents who we are.
So does this first 25 cover changing all the vehicles or just? What's the first?
All of the vehicles will be completed and are accounted for within the 25,000
Are those magnetic signs or are those vinyl signs that stick on the vehicle?
vinyl.
So how much more do you anticipate cost-wise? Do you have a guess, Steve, or?
No.
Okay.
I mean, it all will depend on the pace at which the board would like
Sure.
to see the transition. I mean, as we talked, when we went into the branding, there was no intent to like do this all at once. It was
Right.
just intended to do it over time. And so it's completely up to the board as to the pace that you would like to see. Like I said, one possible logical step would be to wait to see how the 21-22 audit comes out. And you could potentially at that process say we'd like to allocate an additional 25,000 depending on how the end of the year shakes out. That would be a possibility. Or if you felt like there were other things that you really wanted done by the start of the school year, you could tell us that now. It's totally up to the board as to the pace at which we move forward.
Again, Steve added in the board what kind of a list of additional things. All of those have not been vetted out, and there's some of them that have what could be viewed as a kind of a higher value, but those aren't necessarily an accurate value. It's kind of a replacement value for a whole piece, but there's some of them that it might just be replacing a front panel or something else like that. So trying to be judicious in that, looking where all of our options are. And one big launch was obviously the website. The new website launched last week, so Andy and Rick did a phenomenal job with that. So start looking at just our digital presence is completely transformed.
Probably should wait till the audit. Do you guys agree? Does that make sense?
Nice job, Andy.
Thank you. Slowly but surely, we're getting there.
Good deal.
Thank you.
So then we go to the trust.
Yeah, so the second agenda item related to 21-22 is the trust. And obviously we've had discussions that have changed over time in relation to our financial picture. We had initially come up with a plan to try to have an end of the year balance of about $1 million. That was connected to the concept of saving $1 million for the 22-23 budget. We then learned that we were eligible for 3.2 million in additional ESSER 3 funds, which no longer caused us to have that need to set aside $1 million for our 22-23 budget. But then we started talking about the possibility of a reimbursement resolution with our architects that might be up to $800,000 that might potentially cause us to still want to maintain that goal of trying to save $1 million at the end of this fiscal year. One piece of information that will be shared at next Monday night's board meeting is as the architects and the Vogel team continue to dial in on the various timelines. and removing that option 2 at the middle school is they've been able to get the concept of a reimbursement resolution down from 800,000 down to 550. And so they've continued to work on that based on the feedback they received from the last special board meeting. So if the board were to approve that, we would be looking at 500 up to 550, not up to 800. So that picture is evolving a little bit as well. So I wanted to have a discussion on Fund 73 and where this committee would like to see us go. By DPI rules, we have until the end of July to decide what to do with Fund 73. Our initial thinking, this was prior to the ESSER 2 money or ESSER 3 money, was that we were not going to make a payment. We were going to minimize our investment in Fund 73. But our financial picture has definitely changed for the positive. And so what I'm stating in here, just for your input, is our current year payment for district retirees is $390,000. So that's one figure to keep in mind. Another figure to keep in mind is we have this calculation that this outside third party does for us that identifies the amount that they would say if we put that in each year, ultimately the trust will pay for itself and will be funded. And so they determined that amount to be $443,000, which is down quite a bit from what it was years ago. So we have the ability to do a number of things. We could fund the $390,000, which is the current year payment for district retirees. We could fund the $390,000 and send an additional $53,000, which would cause us to get to the $443,000, which is what they're saying would be our standard contribution. Or we could take as much of the $390,000, which is the current year retiree payment, as you would want out of our Fund 73 American United Life account. That's the one that sits there. It's about $2 million. That's the one that it's not tied to anyone's name. We could move that over to the HRA, which is the one that's in people's names, and in effect spend nothing this year on Fund 73. So we have a range of, we could spend nothing. If we spend nothing, of course, that means our end of the year balance will be higher. We could spend $390, which would be spending the amount for the current year retirees, or we could go up to $443. Our past practice has been to go up to that actuarial determined amount. So that's what we have typically done. But because of the unusual circumstances of this past year, we've been talking about whether or not we wanted to do that or not. We're definitely in a much better fiscal position with those additional ESSER funds and the fact that even if the board does approve the reimbursement resolution, it's not going to be as much. So administratively, we're comfortable with any of these options and we're just seeking your input.
If you go.
How many years have we now not put money into that? I know last year for sure we did not. Has it been 2 in a row?
No, last year was the first year.
Okay.
But before that, we've always done at least
Right.
the actuarial minimum amount,
Right.
which is why we're in such a good position in that Fund 73.
So if we continue funding at the max, when does it become self-sustaining? 5 years, 10 years, or do you have that number?
So the actuaries determine like a repayment schedule that I believe is like 30 years. But the reality of it is it would be nowhere near that And the reason for that is all new hires since 2008 have been on the new plan, which is pre-funded. And we are now getting to the point where we have more staff actually now on that plan than we did on the plan that was the previous one, which was not funded. Conceivably, once we turn over our staff, there will really no longer be a liability because everyone since 2008 is being funded. So they create the actuaries have a very specific way that they choose to do it, but ultimately it's the turnover of our staff that will lead us to the point of having no real liability left.
I would suggest that because we've got the funds to fund it at 440. Just, that way, who knows what happens next year, right? But if we can keep those funds going in, it just seems fiscally responsible.
Yeah, and I definitely would say, Jack, we are in a financial position to definitely be able to do that. Between the reimbursement resolution number coming down, if the board approves it, the budget now being balanced because of the ESSER 3 funds, and we are still going to have a good end of the year balance because all along we were targeting that. We are definitely in a financial position where there's no reason why we can't do that.
Steve,
So
that,
did you say the full 400?
That's correct.
Steve, that actuarial fund, that decreases every year? Is that correct?
It has been decreasing over time. It was years ago, it was closer to 600,000. And it has continued to decline as, again, the staff is turning over and we're getting closer and closer to a full liability. It may not this next calculation because of the recent downturn in the stock market, because that's a big factor is what the balance of the account happens to be as well. So Fund 73 is basically the only fund where the investments can also be market-based, in which we do have that. So that's a factor as well.
I agree with Jack. I think if you can pay the whole thing this year, and
Right.
why wouldn't we?
Do you need a motion on that?
I don't, because it's already budgeted to do it. I just wanted to know your perspective on doing it or not.
We'll do it.
Okay.
I really need to say we do it at 443.
Sounds good. Thank you for your feedback. So the next agenda item is the 22-23 budget. To begin the discussion, I just wanted to share with you that at the last meeting, we talked about the possibility of a fourth draft and meeting in August. We have presented you with a balanced budget so that in the event that you want to avoid a fourth draft in August and avoid meeting in August, we can do that. But if you would like to meet in August and have a fourth draft, we're happy to do it. We didn't release the packet until Tuesday because we wanted to include the state equalization aid estimate that came out on Friday, July 1st. So we have that in here. So this is as up to date as we could possibly make it. So we'll talk through the changes and then we'll ask for your input as to whether or not you would like to see a fourth draft or whether you would just like to move ahead with this. Basically what Ally and I worked on for this draft of the budget is we highlighted the changes again in yellow so you could see what changed between the second draft and the third draft. But fundamentally, what was changed is the grants in Fund 10 and 27. So basically, the DPI does let us know during the later half of June what our grants are going to be. So we did update those. We did update our community service budget, so that's Fund 80. The one item to note in Fund 80 is we did decrease the property tax levy. The overall fiscal activity in Fund 80 has just declined in recent years. Of course, a lot of that is COVID related, but we just don't have as much activity in Fund 80 as we did before. And that provides us with the opportunity to decrease the tax levy in Fund 80. So we did that. We were planning to update the Fund 99 Dane County new teacher program budget, but they did not request any changes for 22-23, so those amounts are the same. And then really the major change was number 4. We increased our ESSER 3 allocation to utilize approximately half of the additional funds that the district was eligible for. So we talked about the fact that we were budgeting around 550,000. We learned we had about 3.7 million, about 3.2 million more. This committee talked about spreading that out over 2 years. So we've used approximately half of that this year and would have half remaining next year, which puts us in a really strong position next year because everyone is assuming the state budget will provide some type of increase for schools, given the last one kept everybody at 0. So we would potentially be in a really strong position going into the next state budget cycle with basically leaving half of our ESSER 3 funds untouched. So that's a real positive. Most districts are going to have to fully use that to balance their budget this year, but we've been able to only use half. And then we did include some memos from student services and curriculum about some concepts that they would like to see us consider related to ESSER 3 funds. That's probably the only thing that you haven't seen yet that would maybe cause you to want to meet for a 4th draft. It's not a lot of money, to be honest with you. And I think the curriculum committee is probably familiar with most of these things. But we did have some requests for curriculum and student services for use of the ESSER 3 funds, which we did include. And it still allowed us to only use really half of the ESSER 3 funds to balance our budget, which is why I mentioned that this puts us in the position, if you want to approve the 3rd draft of the budget and take that to the annual meeting, it's balanced. It still has half of the ESSER 3 funds unused, and we're in a really strong position moving forward. If there was an interest for like the curriculum committee to dive into the items that Amy and Tim have put together in a memo, that would need to take place outside of this group, because I didn't really ask Tim and Amy to come in and like talk through the curricular reasons why they put some of these requests in. I just wanted you to know that they did.
Yeah, no, that did not come before the committee at all. And so I was wondering about it. It sounded like they're looking for building level coordinators among the staff.
You want to just pull that out for a minute, Rebecca? So that would be that one.
So these
I
items
thought
are
similar thing
not.
with special ed, I thought.
So if you go to the second page. So everything that Tim and Amy have requested has been added,
Okay,
and the budget is
Oh,
balanced and still uses only half of the ESSER funds. So the reason why I put these in, that in the event the board wanted to just approve the 3rd draft of the budget and be done before the annual meeting, you could. In the event that the board, as board members, you would like to see the curriculum committee talk through these things with Tim and Amy. We could ask the curriculum committee to meet. I can't really comment on the particular reasons for each of these items, but I do know that they identified these as their highest priority uses when we were looking at ESSER 3 funds, and really around the whole concept of, improving instruction. These were the items that they were requesting for consideration. So I don't know, Mark, which of these maybe has or hasn't been discussed by the curriculum committee. I thought some of them had, but I wanted to have the budget committee be in a position to move forward in whatever way you would like. You could move forward with everything except these expenditures, and you could ask the curriculum committee to meet and review these. You could bring the budget forward with everything that's included. It's really up to you as to how you would want to proceed.
So Randy, what's your comment on this?
When we went through all of these things at our administrative retreat, and one of the things that I think we looked at was, and there's certainly some things that we have within those requests that are staff related, with other pieces of this that are support related. And I think when you take a look at those, the two top ones are two technology related pieces that are started. I know that they've started to use and that they want to ingrain in part of their work. The deep dive as far as the explanation of what those are and how they're used probably needs to come from Tim and Amy. But I know that that's a piece that they have vetted out. They feel very strongly that needs to be added to us and continue to be supported within our district. The two bottom ones are definitely areas that we've continued to have those challenges with. And I know we've talked about like kind of how we utilize our funds as far as the PD pieces. We do fall short as far as what we're able to offer there. And then the textbook piece is just a piece I know that is, I think if they had kind of like their highest level piece, they need the money for that in order to keep kind of moving forward with some of the instructional material. So these are very much within their priority range, and I would recommend them.
The other thing I'd like to point out, I think the professional development piece, actually there's been a drop in spending through the pandemic. And with all the new staff we have coming on with the PLCs and stuff, you're going to have to increase that piece. And the cost for the digital textbooks and what have you is going up. So I'm very comfortable passing this along. I was thinking with regard to the 4-year plan and some of the positions that run, which is not part of this budget. So yeah, I'm very comfortable with this going forward.
These are what they have. And did Chris have another item as well?
There was a memo from Chris Mann as well that had a couple of items in there. If you want to click on that,
So
Rebecca.
before we get off of that, there's no position, no new positions.
Not on the curriculum side there now.
130,000, is that an ongoing or is that a
That's
one?
an ongoing.
So we approve it this year, we're approving it. Are these new textbooks? Or
This is
new?
the support for your textbooks, your softwares, your online pieces. Yeah, that's what they're, I believe that's considered to be a continual cost as opposed to a one-time expense.
Right.
I think with the, right now, what's their textbook budget right now, Steve? Do you know offhand?
I don't know, but it hasn't changed in a long time.
Yeah, it probably hasn't been upped in 20 some years. They've been really trying to be pretty skinny with how they utilize that. And I think when you're starting to see that you have textbooks that both have a textbook component with all the other pieces online that's supporting those moving forward, there's additional costs to that. So to me, those are the two.
Just 2 board meetings ago, we approved the proposal to go to a 3-year license because it's just
Right.
economically makes sense. And that's typically, as you start renewing, you're going to have the same question. And I think this covers that well.
Those are the curriculum pieces. And then Chris from Student Services has 3 of them here. One is just you look at your SCL coordinators within the building and just really wanting to make sure that they're treated similarly to other coordinators as far as the pay piece. It's a pretty small dollar amount, but it brings congruence amongst how staff are treated. The second one is adding a few days of contract time to some of our EL teachers' contracts, just to give them some additional days to accomplish some of the work they have. And the third one, I know Steve, she's worked with you on, which is looking at a social worker position, which there's still state reimbursables for that to assist with the costs.
Yeah, the social worker one is just really interesting from the state perspective, and I understand that people probably have different perspectives on why the state is putting the amount of money they are into social workers, but the reality is they are. And as an example, the last time we took a look at this and added a social worker, we actually received a reimbursement in total from the state that exceeded the cost of adding the social worker. The reason for that is social workers specifically are eligible for a pot of money from the state that allows us to claim reimbursement for increased expenses from one year to the next. And on top of that, a portion of social workers' salaries are coded to Special Ed Fund 27 that is eligible for state categorical aid. If you add the two together, the last time that we added a social worker, we actually received more than their salary back in a state reimbursement. It's
That's
just
higher too.
it's just a really, really unique, it's just a really unique situation right now. I know that there are folks that, question why isn't it other positions? Why isn't it school psychologists? Why isn't it guidance counselors? Why isn't it other things? But
Steve,
it's
how many
just,
social workers do we have right now?
I can't speak to that. I don't know the answer to that question as far as how many we have. I believe we are still not at one for each building, and I think in her note here, she's suggesting ultimately that's the goal, is to have a full-time in each building. But I believe we are not there until we would get to the 23-24 school
I
year.
think we're just shy of one per building right now. This helps to move us towards that objective. And then in 23-24, you may see another request of that nature to bring us to one. As long as there's this level of support for it, this has kind of jumped to less than certainly been a piece that those folks have been important to us as we've done our work.
I mean, as you know, we did have a very long list of other requests for consideration. We have not brought any of those staffing items forward. That's on purpose because we want to have that more in-depth, long-term discussion on long-term budgeting and where we're going to go. The reason why we're putting the social worker for consideration right now is just simply the very unique situation that the state has put this in, where in effect, the state is investing significant amounts of money into social workers. And based on what's happened in prior years, as long as it continues, we will receive a reimbursement level probably at least equal to the cost of the position and possibly even more.
So what's the fully burdened cost of a social worker? Is it 100,000?
It would be around 100,000, depending on the experience of the person. And what the state is doing is they are giving, first of all, 50% upfront, right away, of the increase in costs. And then there's a second tier that if the first tier isn't used up, they start paying you the next 50%. They've always done that because districts aren't in a position to be able to do this, even though the state's providing it. Districts just aren't tapping into that money. So they've been getting into the second 50% towards 100% and then paying the categorical aid on top of it. Unfortunately, a lot of districts have not been in the situation to take advantage of that money, which is why we've received so much back because other districts aren't adding. So
Steve, is this an ongoing, state reimburses ongoing? or is
as
this
of
a-
right now, it is.
Okay.
I mean, it could be pulled from a future state budget, but it's been there for several state budgets and it's not been pulled yet.
Well,
So,
given the legislature's focus on mental health in schools, I'd find it hard to believe that they would back out of that piece, because that's gotta be a huge part of that. I move that we accept the proposal.
So I second that.
And I
Um,
just ask before we pass it, what's the field of social workers? for Highland?
I mean, it's, I guess I equate it to, it's similar to the rest of the educational world right now. I mean, there's a pool available. It's typically not a super deep pool, but we've been able, within our last number of hires, to have a competitive interview process and choices.
Yeah, I would support that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
So both of them, are we supporting
Was-
the book, the curriculum as well?
So the motion was to support both. And it passed.
so those were, I mean, that's it for the changes in the third draft of the budget. It's balanced. If you're comfortable with that, you could recommend approval of the third draft to the board, and we would not need to meet in August. And
Any discussion on that? Should we approve third draft?
Motion to approve the third draft.
Second.
Budget.
All in favor?
Aye.
Passed. No meeting, just resolution.
thank you. You know, Brian gave the HR the whole summer, so at least we can take 1 month off.
Okay,
Okay, so the next topic is just a revisiting of what we had started talking about at the last committee meeting. And just as a reminder, the budget committee talked about administration continuing to work to prioritize the 3-year budgeting process. What I shared with you is administration went through a process at our administrative retreat to complete an exercise where all members of the administrative team had an opportunity to review their requests, discuss them within a larger group, and then we had an opportunity to rank them and prioritize them. How this ties into kind of the larger discussion on the November referendum planning is that next week at the regular July board meeting, Eric Cass from PMA will be at the meeting. He's going to go through a presentation that talks about our journey really since last October and the financial decisions that we've been making, where we are at through the third draft of the budget, and what that looks like in a draft financial scenario. That is going to then give the board the information that I think you're looking for in order to continue moving down that process of planning the referendum. So you will need to have an opportunity to see that information. You'll need to have an opportunity to see the update to the presentation that was given at the special board meeting. That will occur next Monday. Then at the second meeting in July, we will have the opportunity to show some draft resolutions. But just to, I guess, foreshadow a little bit of some of the decisions that as board members you're going to have to weigh in on, is Eric is going to be able to show you what is possible. But as board members, you're going to have to determine what you would like to prioritize. And what I mean by that, I'll give you like a simple example. If you would prefer to borrow more and tackle more of the maintenance projects, as opposed to having an exceed the cap question that would be more, you could say, as an example to Eric Cass, my our preference as a board would be to knock off the maintenance list and lower the operational referendum question instead. And he would have the ability to put together a combination that would then address your priorities. If instead the board said, we're comfortable with the idea of, let's say, a middle school heritage and 10 million for maintenance projects, and we would like to see X for an operational question, then he could put it together that way. He will show you a scenario, but then where the board members are going to need to provide us with direction is really what your thoughts are on priorities. It is actually much easier to borrow money through a capital question than it is to take out money through an operational question. The reason for that is borrowing the money gets spread out over 20 years. It can be structured in a way to minimize the impact on taxpayers. The operational questions hit right away and are in the short term much more expensive for taxpayers than borrowing money. And he'll show you that as an example, what is capable on that scenario of an operational question versus a borrowing. We know we need to do both. It's just what mix between the two is the board comfortable with. You know, the board should weigh in on, as an example, would you prefer to clear the deck on the $20 million worth of maintenance, or would you prefer to tackle half of it? So at the special board meeting the prior Monday, if you remember, there was a slide that said maintenance projects to be discussed at the second meeting in July, because you need to see the most dialed in financial scenario we can show you first. And then you need to be thinking about what you think makes the most sense for us to consider. And a lot of it is like crystal ball thinking. You know, if the state budget is terrible for the next two state budgets, you probably would have rather have had an operational question that's larger. If the state budget is normal, we wouldn't need it to be larger, right? Just, it would be our normal growth. It's, you know, we have to do the best we can to try to figure this out. But I think as board members, your thoughts on borrowing versus operational is something we're just going to ask you to be thinking about.
Steve, do both allow the tax base to be at the 10.89?
Yeah, that's a great question. So everything that we've been doing with PMA is surrounding the concept of the tax rate cannot exceed the $10.89 that it currently exists today, which he will talk about. We're looking at, we've included a 5-year financial plan in there. So we are dialing that in with the concept that the board would not approve a tax levy that would exceed that. But the combination of the two is really where your resolutions for the referendum come into play. You'll see a scenario that includes everything on this list and enough to do the middle school and heritage, but not enough to do the maintenance projects. So that's an example of where the board would have to weigh in and say, again, hypothetically, if the preference is to clear the deck on the maintenance list, this part of it, the annual operational referendum, that has to come down to get to the 1089. So it's a combination of the two, and we continue to target the two of them together will not increase the tax rate in the community. So it's all coming together for that second meeting in July, but it's just something you need to be thinking about. That's
So
all.
Steve, on the maintenance list, does that exclude all the anticipated maintenance for Heritage in the middle school, or is that still on the list?
So when we had that list and we had worked with our prior vendor,
Right.
it was in the neighborhood of 20 million to totally clear the deck.
Right.
It also included an annual investment of between like 1 and 2 million to keep it current. That included all the schools. So that included the Heritage Complex, which certainly had a lot of items, it was huge, right? So we would obviously have to remove all of that from the list because of the way this plan is going. But yes, that's a great point. It included everything. So I think one of the things to think about as board members is, are you comfortable tackling part of that list in this referendum and leaving the rest? Or if you're not comfortable with that, we would need to up the borrowing part and drop this part.
Would it be possible to give us what that number would be without Heritage and middle school?
Oh, sure. Yep.
Because that I think, you know, if it's 15 million instead of 20 or whatever it is, that would be helpful.
And I want to say the last item you saw with the 20 million did not include Heritage.
Did not.
That was what, at least my recollection is, but we can kind of.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mark. We will go back and verify that.
Okay, would be helpful.
Jack, what Mark brought up was going back and verifying if we removed all of the maintenance items that were related to the existing Heritage Complex, what would that total be? And so we will go back and verify that. That's all I had with this agenda item. The committee requested an update on the WAIF fundraising reports. As you know, we have approved 3 ongoing efforts. One of them is Warrior Stadium. One of them is the soccer stadium, which is referred to as Warrior Pitch now. One of them was the baseball project. The baseball was different, even though the board approved a multi-year plan for them to do improvements to the complex. They were raising the money first, then spending it. So there wasn't like a loan component to it. But we've always just shared with this committee where the fundraising is for baseball compared to what they've spent. So baseball there's no owing to the district. What you see on the Warrior Pitch report is the fact that as of the end of June, they don't owe anything anymore. So that was a really fast repayment process. So, I mean, it really can only be viewed as a huge success. And not only has it been fully paid off, there's still money left at WAVE related to the complex. Go
Can I
ahead.
interrupt you? For the Warrior Stadium, they had a total cost of like 1.5 million. For the soccer field, the total cost was never, I didn't see it in
I think
there,
285,000.
but it was so much lower. Is that all that field cost? I mean, there was such a difference in the total cost of those 2 fields.
Rebecca, would you mind opening up the middle one?
Unless I wasn't seeing where the total is, or maybe we didn't get the full total amount. Yeah, the total expenditures are so much less. Because I would think those fields are similar in price.
So what you just brought up, and I just realized it now that you said it, is the reports for the Warrior Stadium and the Warrior Pitch look different. The Warrior Stadium has the grand total of the project, subtracts out what the board's commitment was, then lists the balance that was to be raised. This one, for some reason, we set up differently that didn't reflect the total cost, then subtract the board's amount.
So we
This
did,
is-
we contributed.
Yeah,
to
we
this.
did. This is just showing what the part of it that they were gonna pay for. We could retool this to show the total so that the two of them look the same.
You know, for future boards and looking at that, because you're gonna have to replace it at some
Yeah.
point, that might be good background.
Yeah, I'll write that down.
The Warrior Stadium also, if you remember, had all the amenities around there. You had the
Correct.
track. you had a lot of
Right,
different
right. I
amenities
knew
you
that
could
that
have.
was more,
So,
but
yeah,
it
but
just seemed like such
We
a.
can bring those reports into congruence that they look the same.
So the positive on the soccer is they're fully paid off. Baseball's in a positive position. The Warrior Stadium was a 10-year repayment plan. If you can recall, the tax laws changed a couple of years ago and a lot of people paid early. So it got way ahead of where it was going to be. I did put in the notes that it would be a good idea for me to connect in with the fundraising group and to make sure that the remaining 5 years are on schedule. It definitely is ahead of schedule. It's just important to make sure that the back half of it continues to get to that 10-year repayment plan.
Now,
So
the
it
other,
looks like about a quarter of a million.
now, the understanding here is, this is just paying for the construction. It's not paying for the replacement of the turf.
Right, exactly.
So are they continuing to fundraise because one of the agreements that we had said, okay, we'll put this in, but you also have to raise the money for the next part of this. And I thought the football was kind of tied into that.
So I think what we'd have to do, because again, the focus has been, you're right, Jack, the first part of it, the repaying the initial construction of the field. We'd have to have that dialogue starting with all of these groups about what their future plans are, their future efforts, because people change. You know, the individuals that were involved 5 years ago on Warrior Stadium, some of them aren't involved anymore. And so you have different folks involved on these efforts. The good news with both of them is the board's commitment to set aside money at the end of the fiscal year for both of these efforts, or meaning the turf replacement and what we do each year, will put the board in a strong position no matter what happens when we ultimately get to that point. So the board will be able to weigh in and definitely be in a very strong financial position with these fundraising groups for the replacements. And whatever decision a future board makes with what a replacement would look like and what other facilities might be changing around them, the fact that we're allocating on an annual basis 1/10 of the replacement cost will put the board in a really good financial position to have those discussions when we get there.
Steve, does that replacement come out of gate receipts?
It has been, yep. Yep, and last year was the first year we started our soccer fund. So this will be the second year of the soccer fund, and we're now 5 years into the football one.
What's the anticipated life?
And my understanding is they were talking like 12-ish.
Okay, so we're in
12,
good shape. then.
12 to 15 is what they've been saying.
Yeah.
And you're just seeing right now, Mark, when you go back and you see the early adopters of turf at like public schools are just getting to that iteration of replacing them. And those schools were 8-10 years ahead of us.
So this was an update. So Joan will look at the way that those reports are set up. And like I mentioned, we'll be engaging with the Warrior Stadium folks to make sure that the back half of that is on track.
Thank you, Steve.
And then if you want to scroll down. Oh, did I skip the 20?
You did them all.
Okay, we hit them all. We did intend to start putting together information, Jack, based on the meeting that we had, which I did give you August off, but if you wanted to meet in August, we can start going through that. We started putting together some concepts for early planning for 23, 24. We did get a chance to talk with Jack about some better longer term planning specifically related to adding positions, which I think would be really helpful. So we've started working on that. If you want to meet in August, we could certainly do that because Allie and Brian and I met and started pulling together some of that information.
I think it's probably a good idea just to kick it off. So I think one of the things when you start looking at it, you start putting positions in and start identifying, from the board priority, where do we want to spend our money, and do we want to keep administration within a certain range or some of these other in a certain range so that, it makes sense with the student count and stuff. So it'd be interesting to see what we put together, going forward.
Well, I want to compliment you for your proposal to do it that way, and I also want to thank the administration for going through the practice of coming up with a 3-year plan. Again, I think it's going to be really helpful for budgeting.
Thank you.
And then basically this committee has bragging rights as the hardest working committee on the board, I think. Continue working throughout the summer. It's definitely, so we can.
Plus, we meet at 7:30 in the morning.
That's right.
That's
So,
right.
so that's our agenda item. Any other topics you guys want to cover as we move forward? I'm sure Steve will fill out the rest.
8:30, Jack, look behind you.
We have
8:29 and
Impressive.
Do I have a motion to adjourn?
so move.
Second.
Did you?
All
guys
in
wanna-
favor?
Did you want to schedule that meeting?
Or you can do it next Monday if you want.
Let's just do it.
Yeah, we got to make that 8:30.
We're adjourned.
All right, thanks, everybody.
The budget meeting from the world headquarters of the Waunakee Community School has adjourned.